All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. And of course, the breaking news of the day is still the situation in Ukraine. The stock market reacting differently today than it did yesterday. The Dow was up 226 at about 16,394. That's about 1.4%. The NASDAQ is also way up, as is the S&P. That follows yesterday's sell-off after the first day back since the news broke of the Ukrainian situation. Now, Vladimir Putin spoke today, making his first public comments on the situation. Russia also testing an intercontinental ballistic missile, but this was something that the U.S. was aware of, knew that was going to happen. This was pre-planned prior to the Ukrainian incursion or situation, however you want to phrase it. Earlier this morning, we heard that Putin said he was pulling back the military exercises, but he's leaving open the military option. The danger is not over yet. Kerry weighed in today from Ukraine. Obama weighed in today from Washington. It's still a very fluid situation. That's where we stand. Also, Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with the president yesterday and speaking to AIPAC today. Our friend Caroline Glick is here. Who better to talk to about it than her? And we're going to do that. First, I want you to see this soundbite. All that coming up right here now on the Steve Malzberg Show. Here's a little bit of BB as we lead into Caroline. Give a look.
We vacated cities in Judea and Samaria. We left entirely Gaza. We've not only frozen settlements, we've uprooted entire settlements. We've released hundreds of terrorist prisoners, including dozens in recent months. And when we look at what we got in return, it's been scores of suicide bombers, thousands of rockets on our cities, fired from the areas we vacated, and just incessant Palestinian incitement against Israel. So Israel has been doing its part, and I regret to say that the Palestinians haven't. Now, I know this flies in the face of conventional wisdom, but it's the truth.
Okay, folks, that's Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday at the White House. We'll tell you what he had to say at AIPAC in a little bit. But joining us right now, couldn't think of a better timing to have Caroline Glick here, senior contributing editor for the Jerusalem Post, director of the Israeli Security Project at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and her new book, The Israeli Solution, A One-State Plan for Peace in the Middle East, is in my hands. And go get it into your hands because it's a must-read. Hello, Caroline.
Hi, Steve.
Always great to talk to you. Always great to see you. Okay, so before we get to the book, and we'll spend plenty of time on that, how do you think Bibi handled things yesterday sitting there in the Oval Office and then, I guess, when we weren't looking?
No, I think that the statements that he made are absolutely correct, and I think that he comported himself as one would expect the leader of Israel to behave when he is under attack for things that Israel never did, and where Israel is being blamed for things that it didn't do, and the Palestinians are getting off scot-free for once again showing that they're fundamentally unserious about making peace with Israel.
And, you know, we could talk about Mahmoud Abbas from now until the end of the show, and it wouldn't do it enough justice. I just saw a report today. Someone forwarded to me how, you know, he's laying a wreath at this homicide bomber's grave who killed dozens of Jews, and he's honoring another murderous terrorist. And but the president, Obama, told Bloomberg News yesterday, Jeffrey Goldberg, in a wide-ranging exclusive interview, that the Israelis have a promising negotiating partner in Abbas, who he had described as, quote, sincere about his willingness to recognize Israel and its right to exist, to recognize Israel's legitimate security needs, to shun violence, to resolve these issues in a diplomatic fashion that meets the concerns of the people of Israel. And I think it's a rare quality, not just within the Palestinian territories, but within the Middle East generally. I mean, is this fantasy land?
It is fantasy land, and it's also, I think, deliberately misleading, because the only way that you can say such things about Abbas is if you completely ignore everything that he says and does, and ignore everything that he has said and has done for the past 40 years. So it's not just papering over differences to try to move on. It's to ignore and to hide a fundamental problem with him. And I think that the one thing that President Obama said, which was true, which was that to the extent that anybody is moderate among the Palestinian leadership, they're completely out of step with the vast majority of Palestinian leaders and Arab leaders in general in the Middle East. So say somebody actually is a moderate, you make a deal with him, who's going to implement it on his side? The answer is nobody. So even if he was a man of goodwill, which he is not, as you just mentioned, he wouldn't have the power to implement any peace with Israel.
And today, Benjamin Netanyahu at the AIPAC, where he talked, and he said that I'm prepared to make historic peace with our Palestinian neighbors, but he called on Abbas to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. No excuses, no delays. It's time. I asked you this last time you were on, I think, and I just fear that you know, of course he'd incur the wrath of people from within his own you know, people, but what skin off his nose would it be for Abbas to say, okay, we recognize Israel as a Jewish state, and then all, you know, oh, well, that's what you wanted, now you got to give, when of course he'll never mean it, he'll never follow through on it. It's just like Arafat shaking a hand or signing an agreement until it's not expedient for them anymore, and then they break it. So is he setting himself up for this trap where Obama will say, just say the words, don't worry about it, and he does say the words, and then Israel is on the defensive after that?
Well, I think what's interesting is that, you know, if that were the case, then he could have said it a long time ago. But the fact that he hasn't said it has led people like Obama and Secretary of State Kerry and leading leftists in the United States and even in Israel to try to finesse it and say, well, you know, he doesn't really have to say this, he can say that. So they're trying to make it easier for him to get out of saying the one thing that he won't say. So, I mean, what we're more likely to see is the left coming together to say, well, he actually said it when he said that he accepts the fact that Israel exists, which is not the same as saying that Israel has a right to exist. You're just sort of saying, well, you know, Israel...
of course not, right.
Right, and so I think that really what this is they're going to try to do to finesse the fact that he isn't going to make that concession, that he isn't going to state the obvious and to state, you know, the minimum of what has to be said in order to be taken seriously as a peace partner. They're going to try to pretend that he said it already or it doesn't really matter.
Well, one more before we get to the book, and that is, you know, we talked about this to John Kerry, you know, basically threatening Israel with another intifada, saying, hey, you know, if you don't sign up, if you don't come to the table and agree, you know, there could be another intifada. We can't do anything about it. And then after that, he also talked about how, you know, well, you know, international pressure, boycotts, isolation, you know, if you don't come to the table. And we were all outraged about that. And now the president has echoed that in this interview that he did yesterday. If you see no peace deal and continued aggressive settlement construction, and we have seen more aggressive settlement construction over the last couple of years than we've seen in a very long time, if Palestinians come to believe that the possibility of a contiguous sovereign Palestinian state is no longer within reach, then our ability to manage the international fallout is going to be limited. So same thing Kerry said basically, and again, unprecedented from a U.S. president.
It is unprecedented from an American president, and it's not just that he doubled down on what Kerry said. I mean, he gave an explicit threat to Israel. He said, we're not going to protect you, we're not going to defend you. And then the adjectives that he used to describe the exercise of Jewish property rights, aggressive, whereas a man who praises and cultivates terrorism is moderate. Is really instructive. I mean, what he's saying is that the only aggressor are Jewish contractors who are building apartments for families to live in. And the man who is glorifying, praising, and cultivating terrorists in the areas that he controls is a moderate. That is a world turned upside down, and that, as the Washington Post said, is a foreign policy that is based on fantasy and not on reality, and it's deeply dangerous, not only for Israel, but for the United States as well.
We're talking to Caroline Glick, and of course, a senior contributing editor to the Jerusalem Post, and her brand new book, The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East. And I got to tell you, you and I are very like-minded, Caroline. I've told you that before, and I agree with what you've written in the book. Explain to the folks out there, I mean, obviously a two-state solution, the Palestinians' idea of a two-state solution are two Palestinian states. The peace plan, to me, I've been saying for 20 years, has always been tearing Israel apart, P-I-E-C-E by P-I-E-C-E, never P-E-A-C-E. And you have the nerve and the fortitude and the guts to say that.
Well, thank you very much. And it's not just that I say, you know, the truth, which is that the two-state solution that everybody supports is a chimera. It's a lie. It's based upon completely ignoring the fact that the Palestinians could have had a state anytime they wanted to since 1937, but have rejected it. They're not interested in a state. They're interested in destroying Israel. What I do in my book is I set out a policy alternative to this lie, which is a state, the state of Israel. That what Israel should do is apply its laws to the West Bank and grant the Palestinians of those areas full civil rights as permanent residents of Israel, and grant them the ability to apply for Israeli citizenship. And forget this whole nonsense about a Palestinian state whose only purpose in existing is to be yet another base of attacks against Israel, whose aim is the ultimate destruction of Israel.
Where does this stand on the popular front? In other words, you know, we see so many polls. Netanyahu has support, but then we see polls, some run by leftist organizations, that claim that a majority of Israelis do want to, you know, enter into some kind of peace agreement with the Palestinians. So where would your proposal, do you feel, fall when it comes to the opinion of the Israeli public?
Well, I think that it's very, very popular among Israelis. You look at the Likud Knesset faction and you see that over half of them are calling for applying Israeli law to all or parts of the West Bank. Just this current Knesset session, you've had 2 bills being put forward for applying Israeli law to various areas of Judea and Samaria. And I think, you know, over half, in fact, 59% of Israelis think that Israel has to apply its sovereignty to all or parts of the West Bank with or without Palestinian support, and 79% think that Israel should do it with some input from the PLO. So I think that this is a very, very popular position now in Israel. There's more and more discussion of the viability of this plan, and I think that it's time for Americans to start considering it as well, which is why I wrote my book.
What is the likelihood of this happening? And answering that, where are we headed? I mean, you know what the latest is. You know what Obama feels. You know what his threats have been. You know what Kerry's threats have been. They got 3 more years in office, or the better part of 3 more years in office. Where are we all headed? Is Netanyahu can he hold strong? Will he hold strong?
Well, I don't think it really matters, because there's never going to be a 2-state plan coming into force, because the Palestinians don't want it. So I think that inevitably at some point we're going to reach my policy, because it's the only viable policy out there. So I'm not worried, you know, that, oh, the train has already left the station. There is no train and there is no station, because the Palestinians are not interested in peace with Israel. So inevitably we're going to reach the point where this is implemented, and my argument is that this should happen sooner rather than later for the betterment of all concerned.
All right, folks, it's a fascinating book. It's all in here from a fascinating woman who has done it all, politically speaking, and is very outspoken, and that's one of the things we love about her. The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East, by Caroline Glick. Go get it. Thank you, Caroline. Great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve.
My pleasure. All right, folks, when we come back, the panel. Oh, the panel. We'll be joined by Democratic strategist and columnist for Forbes magazine, Rick Unger, and Newsmax White House correspondent John Gizzi. We'll throw this around, certainly, and hear what those 2 gentlemen have to say when we return right here on the Steve Malzberg Show, Newsmax Television.
The Steve